You know, as we've watched President-elect Donald Trump make choices to fill his cabinet, one that has caused a lot of debate is his education secretary. Betsy DeVos, former head of the Michigan GOP and supporter of charter school and voucher programs, will now be in charge of helping shape and carry out Trump's education agenda. Public school advocates say DeVos's appointment is the worst thing for schools. So you have a lot of supporters of hers, though, as well. Let me first start off, and I'm going to start with you, Nolan. Do you believe an education secretary should be someone that has never held any kind of job in education at all, notwithstanding working with foundations that work with children's education?
Of course. I think Betsy DeVos is one of the foremost education reformers in the country. I think her qualifications, you might not agree with her positions, but her qualifications are certainly in line with past cabinet appointments.
Name another cabinet appointment. Name another education secretary who had no experience in education.
Well, she's got a lot of experience in education.
She hasn't taught, hasn't led a school, no education in pedagogy or curriculum.
In education reform her whole life, and that's what this job is all about.
She's worked with foundations, and she's worked with programs and talking about curriculum.
She's been hands-on on education for her whole career. She's eminently qualified. And in terms of her positions, I mean, if you go back to Obama's appointment of Arne Duncan, the teachers' unions were tore up about that too, because he was a supporter of charter schools and of school choice. The teachers' unions are never going to be satisfied with an education secretary appointment unless it comes right out of the union ranks.
I think what is interesting in her appointment, it has turned the spotlight back on to Michigan and what our stance is with charter schools, the growth of charter schools that have happened in the state, and it's caused a larger examination. I think of people taking a look and saying, well, what has happened here in Michigan that Betsy DeVos has supported?
Yeah, well, and let's be clear what her role in education has been. She's a lobbyist, okay? She's someone who has used...
Certainly is not that.
She is someone who has used her wealth to influence policy to protect an industry, right? GLEP, which is the organization that her family created, is a lobbying organization for the billion-dollar charter industry in Michigan. It is not anything more or less than that. So lobbying somehow now qualifies you to sit at the head of the policy table. That's a new one. The other thing that's true is let's take a look at what that industry has gotten us here in the city of Detroit. An incremental improvement over 20 years that they've had to make dramatic change, which is what they promised, and they haven't delivered on it. And her lobbying has protected that industry from government oversight that would maybe have moved the improvement further. Maybe said, hey, if this is not working, maybe we should try something else. If your school is not performing, maybe it ought to be closed, which is what she says ought to happen to public schools that don't perform. There is an automatic sort of contradiction between the kind of work that she has done, which is about protecting an industry as opposed to advocating for outcomes, that is really in contradiction with the whole purpose of the Department of Education. And that's why this is a sort of strange, but certainly deeply inappropriate kind of nomination.
Betsy DeVos wants every child to have a decent education.
I don't think you would get anybody to argue with that, and no one would argue against
that. That's what she's worked for her whole life.
No one's arguing.
Had she and Dick been successful in their voucher campaign several years ago, you would have far better range of choices in Detroit than you have now. The Catholic schools that serve kids so well here for so long would be stronger and would still be in the city. I think what you'll see out of Betsy DeVos is innovation on a lot of levels. She doesn't think this traditional model of education is serving kids very well, and I think she will bring and support innovative teaching techniques in the classroom. I think you'll see a lot less meddling from Washington than we saw in the previous two administrations. I think the governance decisions, whether it's charter or public, will remain at the local level and at the state level. I think what she will bring is a more innovative approach to teaching children. I think she'll champion technology. She'll champion
if that were true,
classrooms.
If that were true, then
that's what she says.
If that were true, then I, as a parent in Detroit, would have a wealth of choices that I don't have. These people have spent
Had the
20
voucher
years. Hold
program
on.
passed, you would have
No.
those choices.
But the state voted it down. No,
Yeah,
people, it did
people
not
voted
get the
down.
votes.
Of course.
These people have promised for 20 years that things would get better for us in Detroit. We spend $1 billion a year of public money sending it to their schools, and we don't get better outcomes.
And people would argue, though, that there are some charter schools that are very
Many.
successful,
There
and
are
they have
some-
been a very
Okay.
successful alternate choice
And more
for
kids are
children.
graduating
So
from high
what's the
school
best?
in Detroit
What's the best high
than
school in the
before.
city of Detroit? The best high school in the city of Detroit, public or charter? It's Cass Tech, according to the numbers. What's the best elementary school in the city of Detroit?
Then how come you can't?
Chrysler Elementary.
Then how come Detroit hasn't been able to replicate them?
So the whole point is
UPSM
the whole point
is a charter
hold
school.
on.
Hang on
The
one
whole
second,
point-
Nolan,
the whole
Nolan,
point
hang
is-
on.
The whole point is that there are outliers. There are always outliers. There are outliers among public schools that are really great. There are outliers among charters that are really great. But neither system has produced the
But-
average quality that we need.
And I think that-
charter schools have done that while arguing not to be held accountable for it.
And that's
the
what I
problem.
wanted to get to is you talked about this, Nolan, about governance, and I think that's what people are concerned about, because when you look at Michigan and you look at the proliferation of charter schools and you look at what kind of regulations there are, or the transparency or lack of transparency that people have to see what the money is being spent on certain schools, that's what maybe some of the concern is. I think you can agree across the board that everyone wants to make sure that every child has got the possibility of a good education. If they don't have it nearby, that they have the choice to be able to find that for their child.
And the authorizers are supposed to be providing oversight. They should be providing oversight. If not, we should enforce that. But here's the reality. A lot more children, a greater percentage of children in Detroit are graduating from high school now than they were before the charter movement started. Charters aren't a cause of the public schools' failure. They're
No,
a symptom.
they haven't been a solution.
There was more kids are graduating than they did before.
What do the
because
test scores
people
look like,
have-
Nolan?
Because people have more options. There was a time before the charters came when not even half the kids in Detroit who started 9th grade were graduating from 12th grade. That's a better number today.
other thing that's-
because charters have provided competition.
So the
Okay,
other
hang
thing
on,
that will
hang on, Nolan,
the other
Stephen.
thing that will be true in her confirmation is
this
that
is
you
what
will
we're getting
have
back to.
people you'll have people from other states, right? People from Massachusetts, people from Tennessee. There is no other state in the country that allows charter schools to operate the way we do here in Michigan. And in fact, if you go to those other states and talk to people in education, they snicker at what we do here as it's a joke. And so the idea, William Weld, who was a Republican governor in Massachusetts, the vice presidential candidate on the Libertarian the ticket this time, is someone who pioneered real education innovation in Massachusetts. It will be very interesting to see how much people like that speak up about the rather craven and self-interested things that charter lobbyists like Betsy DeVos have done here in the state of Michigan.
And the states you mentioned also provide far greater accountability of their public schools.
No
And
one's
we have
arguing
not-
against that. Let's
and
do
we've
it all.
not had that
Right.
in Michigan.
But
And
no,
what
we
else
aren't lobbying
haven't-
against that.
What we also haven't been able to do in Michigan is break education reform away from the special interests that control it,
she is a special
including the
interest.
education establishment.
But she is a
And that's
special
why
interest, and that's the
Massachusetts,
point.
Tennessee,
Yeah,
Florida
because
are
they don't have
progressing
Betsy DeVos.
greater than we are.
All right.
Betsy DeVos will get confirmed, and she'll be
Oh,
the
she
great
might.
secretary.